My sister hid me at the reject table at her wedding because of my wheelchair. Then she panicked when every single wedding check came back. Rejected. My sister made me sit at the reject table at her wedding because of my wheelchair. Then she called me in a panic when the checks were rejected too. I've been in a wheelchair since I was 12. It happened in a car accident on the way home from my sister Camille's high school graduation. A drunk driver hit us head-on. I protected Camille, pushed her down when I saw the headlights coming. She walked away without a scratch. I never walked again. I spent the next 15 years building my accounting firm from my hospital bed, then my wheelchair. Now I manage portfolios for professional athletes. Camille became a physical therapist and made decent money. Nothing spectacular, but decent. We stayed close despite everything. I paid off her student loans without her asking. When our parents died, I handled all the funeral costs so she could grieve. Never asked for thanks. Never needed it. She was my little sister. That's what you do. Last year, Camille got engaged to Preston. He was an event planner. He came from old money and is very concerned about appearances. The first time he met me, he asked Camille if I could transfer to a regular chair for photos so my wheelchair wouldn't be distracting. I should have known then, but Camille apologized for him. She said he didn't mean it that way. He just wanted perfect wedding photos. I let it slide. Camille came to me 8 months before the wedding. They had gone over budget. Way over. Preston wanted the country club venue, the 10-piece band, the 7-course meal, and the premium open bar. His parents had promised to pay, but backed out after some bad investments. Camille was panicking. They'd already sent invitations. Could I help? Just a loan, she said. She'd pay me back. I wrote a check for $75,000 that day. Told her it wasn't a loan. It was my wedding gift. She cried. Said I was the best sibling anyone could ask for. Preston never thanked me directly, but he started being nicer. Included me in the wedding planning. Asked my opinion on centerpieces. I thought we were finally connecting. 3 weeks before the wedding, I got my invitation. Table 19. I figured it was a mistake. Called Camille to laugh about the typo. She went quiet. Said Preston had done the seating chart. Table 1 was the wedding party. Tables 2 to 8 were his family. Tables 9 to 15 were her friends from college and work. Tables 16 to 18 were mutual friends. Table 19 was in the auxiliary room through a separate door with the venue's service entrance for overflow guests and anyone with special needs. She actually said that. Special needs. I asked if she was serious. She said Preston didn't want my wheelchair blocking the aisle for photos, and the auxiliary room was more accessible anyway. No stairs, closer to the accessible bathroom like she was doing me a favor. I asked who else was at table 19. Camille mumbled about a former coworker who Preston didn't like, some +1s they didn't know, and our cousin with autism who might make noise during the ceremony. The reject table, hidden away so Preston could have his perfect wedding photos. I asked Camille if Preston knew I paid for the wedding. She said that wasn't relevant. He didn't need to know because it might make him feel obligated to change things. I said okay. Didn't argue, didn't fight, just said I understood. The wedding day arrived. It was a beautiful Saturday in June. I wore the outfit Preston had approved, the same shade of blue as the wedding party, so I'd blend in but not stand out. Arrived early to help, even though no one asked. During the ceremony, I sat in the back row. Preston had someone save a seat up front for appearances, but told me the back was easier for my chair. I watched my sister marry someone who was embarrassed by my existence. The reception started. I wheeled to the auxiliary room. Table 19 was exactly what I expected. Shoved in a corner, a plastic tablecloth instead of linen, no centerpiece, folding chairs, the crackling speaker barely carried the music from the main room. My table mates included Camille's old roommate, somebody's random +1, who spent the night on their phone, and our cousin, who was delightful but confused why we were separated from everyone. I stayed for exactly 1 hour, long enough to be polite. Then I left and made some calls. Monday morning, the country club called Camille. There was a problem with the payment. The check had been canceled, all of it. The venue wanted their money immediately, or they'd be filing charges for theft of services. The band called next. Then the caterer, the florist, the photographer, every single vendor, $75,000 worth of canceled checks. Camille called me in a panic. I didn't answer. She drove to my office. Security wouldn't let her up. She waited 6 hours in the lobby. I finally came down. She was frantic. She asked what happened to the checks. I explained calmly that I'd canceled them all. Her face went completely white. Not pale, white. Like every drop of blood just drained straight out. Her mouth opened and closed a few times before any sound came out. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked on every other word. The vendors were calling her, she said. The country club manager had used words like fraud and theft of services. The band leader was threatening to sue. The photographer had already filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau. The florist was talking about small claims court. She kept running her hands through her hair, pulling at it, making it stick up in weird directions. People walking through the lobby were staring at us. I didn't care. I kept my voice level and told her those were her problems to solve, not mine. I gave her a gift. When she decided to humiliate me by hiding me away like I was something shameful, I took that gift back. Simple as that. She grabbed the arms of my wheelchair and leaned down close to my face. Begged me to reconsider. Said Preston didn't mean anything by the seating chart. He was just stressed about making everything perfect. They could fix this. They'd move me to a better table at the next family event. They'd make it right. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I asked her directly if she thought it was acceptable. Taking $75,000 from someone, then hiding them in a separate room through the service entrance, treating them like an embarrassment, like something to be managed and tucked away. She couldn't meet my eyes, stared at the floor, mumbled something about Preston being under a lot of pressure with the wedding planning. His parents backing out had stressed him out. He wasn't thinking clearly about the seating arrangements. I waited. She kept talking. Circular arguments, excuses. Everything came back to Preston's stress or Preston's vision or Preston's family expectations. Not once did she say that what she did was wrong. Not once did she acknowledge that I had every right to be hurt. Security approached us after about 20 minutes. The guard I knew Johnny looked uncomfortable, asked if everything was okay. Camille straightened up and said we were fine. Just a family discussion, but she didn't leave. Kept trying to convince me. Offered to pay me back over time. Offered to have Preston apologize. Offered everything except actually understanding why I was angry. 1 hour passed, then another. Johnny came back twice more. The third time he had his supervisor with him. They asked Camille to leave. She refused. Said she wasn't going anywhere until I agreed to fix this. The supervisor explained calmly that this was private property and I was asking her to go. Camille looked at me like I was a stranger, like she couldn't believe I was doing this to her. The security supervisor put a hand on Camille's shoulder, not rough, just firm, and guided her toward the exit. Camille kept looking back at me. Her eyes were red. I rolled my wheelchair to the elevator and went up to my office. From my window on the 7th floor, I could see the parking lot. Camille's car was still there. She sat in the driver's seat with her head in her hands for almost an hour. Just sat there, not moving. I watched her and felt nothing. No, that's not true. I felt relieved and guilty about feeling relieved and angry that I felt guilty. Elise knocked on my doorframe, asked if I was okay. I told her the truth that I felt guilty and relieved and angry all at once, like my emotions couldn't figure out what they were supposed to be doing. She came in and sat down, said that was completely normal given what happened, that I'd set a boundary and Camille was having trouble accepting it. That didn't make me wrong. It just made it hard. We sat there for a while. She didn't try to fix anything, just sat with me. I appreciated that. The next morning, my office line rang at 8:30. I almost did not answer, saw it was an unknown number, picked up anyway. Preston's voice hit me like a physical thing. Screaming! Literally screaming. I was ruining their lives, destroying their future. How dare I cancel the checks after the wedding already happened? He was going to sue me. His family's lawyers were already looking into it. I was a bitter, jealous person who couldn't stand to see other people happy. I held the phone away from my ear and counted to 30. Then I hung up. Blocked the number. Blocked Camille's cell. Blocked their home number. Blocked every number I had for either of them in my work phone. My personal cell was already done. Sterling called around 10, my attorney. We'd worked together for years on business contracts. He got straight to the point. The country club had contacted him about the canceled payment. He'd reviewed everything. I was legally clear. The check was a gift, not a contract. I'd canceled it before services were fully rendered since I stopped payment on Monday and the wedding was Saturday. No legal obligation to pay. Camille and Preston were now liable for the full amount to all the vendors. If they couldn't pay, the vendors could sue them, send them to collections, ruin their credit. He said it matter of fact, no judgment, just the legal reality. I felt that twist in my stomach again, the guilt. But I reminded myself that I didn't create the situation. They did. When they decided my wheelchair was too ugly for their perfect photos. When they stuck me in that auxiliary room with the plastic tablecloth and folding chairs. When they took my money and treated me like garbage. Sterling asked if I wanted him to prepare for any potential legal action from their side. I said yes. Document everything. My phone rang again 20 minutes later. Different number. I answered. A man's voice, professional, polite, asked for me by name, said he was Rhett Champion, the manager at the country club. He sounded genuinely confused, concerned, wanted to know if there had been some mistake with the payment. He mentioned that Camille had seemed like such a nice young woman when they'd met to plan the wedding. Very apologetic about the whole situation. I took a breath, explained very calmly that there was no mistake. I had funded the wedding as a gift to my sister. I revoked that gift after being treated poorly at the event. Rhett went quiet for a moment, then he said he understood, wished me well, thanked me for being direct with him. The line went dead. I sat there staring at my computer screen, thinking about Camille sitting in her car in the parking lot yesterday, about Preston screaming at me this morning, about the vendors who were about to go after them for $75,000 they didn't have, about that plastic tablecloth and those folding chairs and that crackling speaker in the auxiliary room. I didn't feel guilty anymore. Over the next 3 days, my phone lit up constantly with messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Camille was using different phones to get around the blocks I'd set up. The first batch came Tuesday morning. Long paragraphs about how sorry she was, how she never meant to hurt me, how we could work this out if I just talked to her. By Tuesday afternoon, the tone shifted. Shorter messages asking why I was being so stubborn, reminding me that family is supposed to forgive each other, pointing out that Preston was just trying to make their wedding day perfect. Wednesday brought angry texts, accusations that I was ruining their lives over nothing, that I was being petty and vindictive, that canceling the checks after the wedding was basically stealing. Thursday morning, she switched back to desperate, begging me to reconsider, saying the vendors were threatening to sue them, asking if I really wanted to destroy her credit and her future over a seating chart. Not once did any message actually say what she did was wrong. Not once did she acknowledge that hiding me away like I was something shameful might have hurt me. Every text was about her problems, her stress, her marriage, her money. I saved every single one. Elise came into my office Thursday afternoon with 2 coffees and a serious expression. She set 1 cup on my desk and dropped into the chair across from me. We needed to talk about documentation, she said. If this turned into an actual legal situation, I'd want records of everything. She pulled out a notebook and started making a list. All the text messages from Camille, the calls from Preston, the original wedding invitation showing table 19, any emails about the wedding planning, the bank records showing the $75,000 check, and the cancellation. I told her I had most of it already, but I'd pull everything together in one file. She nodded, and then mentioned that her sister Olivia had photographed the wedding. Olivia had been pretty upset about the whole auxiliary room situation when she saw it. She'd taken photos of table 19 specifically because she thought it was wrong. If I wanted documentation of what that setup actually looked like, Olivia would provide the pictures. I said yes. Having visual proof felt important somehow. 1 week after the wedding, my phone rang with a number I actually recognized. My cousin, who'd been stuck at table 19 with me. I answered and he started talking immediately. He wanted to thank me for what I did. The whole wedding had made him feel terrible, he said, being separated from everyone else, sitting in that side room with the cheap decorations, watching people walk past the door to get to the real reception. He'd felt humiliated when he heard what I'd done with the checks. He was glad someone finally stood up to the way Preston treats people he thinks are beneath him. He dealt with his attitude at family events before, the way he looked at him like he was a problem to manage. His voice got tight when he talked about it. I thanked him for calling and told him he deserved better than that table too. After we hung up, I sat there thinking about how many people Preston had made feel small. Then my parents' old friends started calling. First, it was the Caldwells who'd known my mom since college. Then the Harris, who'd lived next door to us for years. Then 3 more couples from my parents' social circle. All of them had heard rumors about drama with Camille's wedding payments. They wanted to know what happened. I gave each of them the same simple explanation. I'd paid for the wedding as a gift to my sister. I was seated away from family in a separate room despite funding the event. I canceled the payment after being treated that way. Most of them reacted with immediate shock. Mrs. Caldwell actually gasped and said she couldn't believe Camille would allow that. Mr. Harris said my parents would have been furious if they'd known. Every conversation ended the same way with them, saying, I'd done the right thing, and Camille should be ashamed of herself. Word was spreading through their circle fast. Elise told me on Friday that Camille had called her office trying to reach me. She'd told her I was unavailable and she'd asked her to pass along a message. Preston's parents had offered to cover part of the vendor payments. They'd come up with $20,000. That left Camille and Preston on the hook for $55,000 they didn't have. She was asking if I'd reconsider if maybe we could work out some kind of payment plan. Anything to help them avoid getting sued by the vendors. Elise had told her she'd pass the message along, but made no promises. She looked at me across her desk and asked what I wanted her to say if she called back. I said, tell her I'm not available. She nodded and made a note. 2 weeks after the wedding, a thick envelope arrived at my office. The return address showed a mediation firm downtown. Inside was a formal letter on expensive letterhead requesting my presence at a mediation session to resolve this family dispute amicably. The letter was signed by someone named Mia Vance, professional mediator. It laid out the situation in careful, neutral language. A disagreement over wedding expenses, family relationships under strain, an opportunity to find common ground. The letter asked me to contact their office to schedule a session. I called Sterling immediately. He read through the letter while I waited on the phone. After a minute, he said I had no legal obligation to attend. The canceled check situation was clean from a legal standpoint, but mediation might provide closure if I wanted it. Give everyone a chance to say their piece in a controlled environment. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to just be done with all of it, but another part wanted Camille to hear exactly what she'd done to me. I told Sterling I'd do one session under conditions, neutral location, and he attends with me. He said he'd contact the mediator. Sterling called back the next day with confirmation. The mediator had agreed to my conditions. The session would be at the mediation firm's office downtown. Sterling would attend as my advisor. The mediator had also confirmed who else would be there: Camille, Preston, and Preston's mother. 3 of them and 1 of me. Sterling heard the concern in my voice when I said that out loud. He reminded me that he'd be there too, and the mediator was trained to keep things balanced. I said, okay, and we scheduled it for the following Tuesday. The night before the mediation, I had dinner with Isa Schwartz at a restaurant near my apartment. Isa played professional soccer, and I'd been managing her investments for 3 years. We'd become actual friends somewhere along the way. She knew the basic outline of what happened with Camille's wedding. Over pasta, she told me about cutting off her own toxic family members 5 years ago. Her parents had tried to control her career decisions and take her money. When she set boundaries, they turned the whole extended family against her. Cutting them off had been the hardest thing she'd ever done, also the healthiest. She looked me in the eye and said, "Sometimes people who share your blood don't deserve access to your life." I asked if she ever regretted it. She said, "No, not once." Tuesday morning, Sterling picked me up at 9 o'clock. The mediation firm occupied the 3rd floor of a building in the financial district. We took the elevator up and checked in with the receptionist. She led us to a conference room with a long table and 2 chairs. The mediator was already there, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and a calm expression. She introduced herself as Mia and explained how the session would work. Everyone would have a chance to speak. She'd facilitate the conversation and keep things productive. The goal was understanding and resolution. 5 minutes later, Camille, Preston, and Preston's mother walked in. Camille's eyes were already red when she sat down. The mediator had barely finished her opening remarks when Camille started crying. Actual tears running down her face as she talked about how I destroyed their marriage before it even started. They'd had to cancel their honeymoon. The financial stress was tearing them apart. Preston couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. All because I decided to be vindictive over a seating arrangement. Her voice broke on the last words. The mediator let her finish and then gently redirected. She asked Camille to focus on the specific issues that led to the situation, rather than the outcomes. Camille wiped her eyes and glared at me. Preston finally spoke up. His voice was quiet and tired. He admitted out loud that the seating arrangement was wrong and hurtful. He should have stood up for me. He should have insisted I sit with family, but then his tone shifted. He said canceling the checks was a massive overreaction that punished innocent vendors who'd done nothing wrong. The florist, the caterer, the band, they were all just trying to run their businesses. Now they were threatening legal action against him and Camille. Was that really fair? I looked at him across the table. I said he seemed more concerned about vendors than his own wife's family. He'd taken $75,000 from me and then hidden me in a side room like I was too embarrassing to be seen. And now he wanted to talk about what was fair. Preston's mother leaned forward in her chair. She said I was being vindictive and petty, holding one small mistake over their heads, destroying their financial stability over a seating chart. Her voice got louder as she talked about how young couples make mistakes, and family is supposed to forgive. Sterling sat down his pen and looked at her calmly. He said that hiding the person who paid for your entire wedding in a separate room wasn't a small mistake. It was a deliberate choice that showed exactly how much they valued me. Preston's mother's face went red, but she didn't respond. I took a breath and spoke directly to Camille. I told her this wasn't about one seating chart. It was about 15 years of taking my help for granted, never acknowledging my sacrifices, treating my disability as an inconvenience to manage instead of just part of who I am. I said I paid off her student loans, and she never even sent a thank you card. I handled our parents' funeral costs so she could grieve, and she acted like that was just what I was supposed to do. I funded her wedding, and she stuck me in aside who I am. I said I paid off her student loans, and she never even sent a thank you card. I handled our parents' funeral costs so she could grieve, and she acted like that was just what I was supposed to do. I funded her wedding, and she stuck me in a side room with the people her husband didn't want to see. The conference room went completely silent. Even Preston stopped fidgeting with his tie. The mediator wrote something on her notepad. Camille started crying. Not the angry tears from earlier, but quiet ones that made her shoulders shake. She said she never realized how much she'd hurt me over the years, that she just got used to me always being there to fix things. She said she took me for granted and she was sorry. It was the first thing she'd said that sounded genuinely sorry instead of just scared about money. I felt something shift in my chest, but I didn't let it show on my face. Preston looked at Camille crying and then turned to me. He said the wedding was supposed to be the perfect day. I made it about myself by being difficult about the seating. He said, I could have just been gracious and sat where I was told. Sterling raised his eyebrows and wrote something on his legal pad. The mediator cleared her throat and asked what outcome I was looking for. I said honestly that I wanted acknowledgement of the hurt they caused. Assurance that I'd be treated with basic respect going forward, not as Camille's charity case sibling in the wheelchair, not as someone to hide away, just as a person who deserves the same consideration as anyone else. Preston scoffed. The sound was loud in the quiet room. I looked at him and knew exactly where he stood. Nothing I said was going to change his mind about me. Camille wiped her face and said they'd pay me back the $75,000 over time if I'd help them settle with the vendors now. Maybe we could work out a payment plan. She looked desperate and hopeful at the same time. I told her that ship had sailed. They needed to handle their own financial obligations like adults. I wasn't going to rescue them from consequences they brought on themselves. Preston's mother jumped back in. She offered to pay another $15,000 if I'd contribute the remaining $40,000. She said it would keep this family together. I looked at her and said, family should have been their priority before they stuck me at the reject table. Before they took my money and treated me like I was too embarrassing to be seen. I wasn't interested in buying my way back into their good graces. The mediation went in circles for another hour. Camille kept crying and saying I was ruining their lives. Preston went back and forth between admitting fault and defending his own decisions. Preston's mother tried to negotiate different payment splits. Sterling stayed quiet mostly but took notes the whole time. Mia tried to redirect the conversation towards solutions, but nobody was actually listening to each other. We were all just talking at each other. When Mia finally called time after 2 hours, everyone stood up to leave. Camille caught my arm as I wheeled toward the door. She leaned down and whispered that she was sorry, that she knew she messed up badly. Her voice cracked on the last word. I looked up at her and said, sorry doesn't pay vendor bills. Then I pulled my arm away and left with Sterling. Over the next week, I heard things through mutual friends. Camille and Preston took out a personal loan at a terrible interest rate, 22% or something crazy like that. They used it to pay off all the vendors and avoid legal action. The florist had been threatening to sue. The photographer had already filed in small claims court. They settled everything, but now they had this huge loan hanging over them. Part of me felt guilty when I heard that. The part that spent 15 years taking care of Camille and making sure she never had to struggle. But mostly, I felt like they were finally facing real consequences for their choices. For the first time, Camille was dealing with a problem I didn't fix for her. A few days after I heard about the loan, I got an email from Olivia. She's the wedding photographer's assistant, and also happens to be my friend's sister. She sent me the photos she took of table 19 at the wedding. I opened the attachment, and there it was. The plastic tablecloth that was supposed to be linen. The folding chairs that didn't match anything else. No centerpiece. While every other table had elaborate flower arrangements. The crackling speaker mounted on the wall. You could see the service entrance door in the background of one shot. My anger flared up all over again looking at those photos. I saved them to a folder on my computer, named it Reject Table Evidence. I wanted to remember why I made this decision every time I felt guilty about what happened to Camille and Preston. A month passed without hearing from Camille. I threw myself into work and tried not to think about the mess I'd created. Then one Tuesday evening, the doorman called up from the lobby. Camille was downstairs asking to see me. My finger hovered over the button to tell her no, but avoiding my sister forever wasn't realistic. We'd have to face each other eventually. I told the doorman to send her up. I wheeled to my apartment door and waited. The elevator dinged down the hall. Camille walked toward me, looking worse than I'd ever seen her. Her hair was messy and she had dark circles under her eyes. Her clothes looked wrinkled like she'd slept in them. She stopped a few feet from my door and just stood there. I backed up to let her inside. She came in slowly and sat on my couch without being invited. Her hands were shaking. She looked at the floor for a long moment before speaking. Preston was furious with her. He blamed her for not managing me better. He said she should have known I'd caused problems, and she should have handled me differently. Their marriage was already falling apart from the stress. They fought constantly about money and about me. The personal loan payments were killing them financially. Preston's parents weren't helping anymore because they were mad at both of them. I wheeled over to the window and looked out at the city lights. Part of me felt bad for Camille. The bigger part of me felt like this was exactly what should happen. I turned back to face her. I told her I wasn't sorry for what I did, but I was sad about how our relationship got to this point. How we went from being close siblings to this mess. Camille's voice cracked when she answered. She admitted she let Preston make decisions she knew were wrong. She was afraid of conflict with him, afraid he'd leave her if she stood up to him. So she went along with things that made her uncomfortable, including the seating chart. I asked her why she married someone she was afraid of. She didn't have an answer for that. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Camille told me something that made my stomach drop. Preston wanted to not invite me to the wedding at all. He said it would be easier if I just wasn't there. Camille fought him on that. She insisted I had to be invited because I was her sibling. The auxiliary room was her compromise. She actually thought she was doing something good by making sure I was included at all. I stared at her. I asked if she really thought sticking me in a separate room with the service entrance was a compromise. She looked miserable but didn't argue. I explained that compromise means everyone gives something up. Not that one person gets completely humiliated while the other person gets everything they want. That's not compromise. That's just being cruel with extra steps. Camille put her head in her hands. We talked for over an hour after that. I brought up all the years I'd helped her financially and emotionally. The student loans I paid off, the funeral costs I covered, the wedding I funded, all the times I was there for her without asking for anything back. She took it as her due like it was just what I was supposed to do. She never recognized the sacrifice, never thanked me properly, never thought about what I was giving up to help her. Camille said she understood now how one-sided things were, but I wasn't sure she really got it. Not fully. Understanding something in your head is different from feeling it in your gut. I told her I was willing to have a relationship with her eventually, but it needed to be different from before. It needed actual reciprocity and respect. She couldn't just take from me and expect me to be grateful she let me be part of her life. She asked what that would look like. I said, honestly, I didn't know yet. We'd have to figure it out together. But the old dynamic where I fixed all her problems was over permanently. She nodded slowly. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. Could I ever forgive Preston? I looked at her directly and told her the truth. No, I didn't think so. He'd shown me exactly who he was. Someone who cared more about appearances than people. Someone who took my money and treated me like garbage. Someone who would rather hide me away than acknowledge I existed. Camille looked devastated when I said that. But she didn't argue. She didn't defend him or make excuses. That told me something important. She was starting to see him more clearly, too. Before Camille left, she stood up and came over to where I sat by the window. She crouched down so we were at eye level. She thanked me for the 15 years I spent protecting and supporting her. She said she should have said it 1,000 times before. It wasn't enough to fix everything, not even close, but it was a start. I watched her leave and felt exhausted. 2 weeks later, Elise came into my office with an annoyed expression. She'd heard through a mutual friend that Preston was telling people a different story. According to Preston, I was jealous of his relationship with Camille. That's why I sabotaged their wedding. I was a bitter, lonely person who couldn't stand to see my sister happy. So, I destroyed her special day out of spite. I laughed when Elise told me that. It wasn't a happy laugh, more like a tired one. Of course, Preston was rewriting history to make himself the victim. That's what people like him did. They could never accept that their own actions had consequences. It was always someone else's fault. I told Elise not to worry about it. People who knew me would know the truth. People who believed Preston's version weren't worth my time anyway. I focused on my work after that, threw myself into managing my clients' portfolios and building my business. There was satisfaction in the company I'd built despite every obstacle life threw at me. I'd started from a hospital bed after the accident. I had built everything from nothing while people told me it was impossible. Now I had professional athletes trusting me with their financial futures. That meant something. Isa stopped by my office one afternoon with someone new, a sports medicine doctor who worked with several teams. He was looking for a new accountant after his previous one retired. Isa thought we'd be a good fit. We talked for an hour about his needs and my services. By the end of the meeting, he'd signed on as a client. My business kept growing. My life kept moving forward, and I felt lighter than I had in years. 3 months passed without any contact from Camille. My phone buzzed one Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports for one of my basketball player clients. The text was from an unknown number, but I recognized the area code as Camille's. She asked if I'd be willing to meet for coffee sometime. No pressure, just to talk. I stared at the message for a solid minute before typing back that I'd meet her at the cafe 2 blocks from my office on Thursday afternoon. That way, I could leave easily if things went badly. She sent back a simple thank you. Thursday came, and I wheeled into the cafe early, grabbed a table near the door with good exit access. Camille arrived exactly on time, looking thinner than I remembered. She ordered her coffee and sat down across from me. We made awkward small talk about work for maybe 5 minutes before she finally got to the real reason for the meeting. She told me that she and Preston were in marriage counseling. The financial stress from paying back the wedding loan had created serious problems between them. They fought constantly about money now, but what really bothered her was that Preston still didn't think he'd done anything wrong with the seating arrangement. He kept insisting he was just trying to make the day perfect, and I was too sensitive about the whole thing. I set my coffee cup down carefully and asked Camille why she was staying with someone who couldn't even acknowledge hurting her sibling. She looked down at her hands and said she loved him. She hoped he would grow and learn to be more considerate. Maybe counseling would help him see things differently. I told her that was her choice to make, and I respected it, but I wouldn't pretend to have a relationship with Preston. I couldn't sit through family dinners and holidays acting like everything was fine when he still thought hiding me away was reasonable. Camille nodded slowly and said she understood that. Then she asked if she and I could slowly rebuild our relationship separate from her marriage. She wanted her sibling back in her life, even if Preston wasn't part of that. I thought about it for a long moment, watched people coming in and out of the cafe. Finally told her I was willing to try, but the old dynamic where I fixed all her problems and bailed her out financially was over permanently. She needed to understand that. Camille agreed immediately, said she knew she'd taken advantage of my generosity for years. She wanted to prove she could be a better sister. We started meeting for coffee every few weeks after that, kept the conversations light at first, talked about work and random stuff we'd seen online, avoided mentioning Preston or the wedding. Camille never once asked me for money or help with her financial situation. That meant something to me. Showed she was actually trying to change her behavior instead of just saying the right words. The meetings got easier as time went on. Started feeling less like walking on eggshells and more like actual sibling time. We could laugh about stupid things again. Remember good memories from before. Everything got complicated. It wasn't the same as before, but it was something. 6 months after the wedding, Camille called me on a Saturday morning. I was at home going through client files when my phone rang. She sounded nervous when I answered. Took her a minute to get to the point. Then she told me she was pregnant. They'd found out the day before. I felt a complicated mix of emotions hearing that news. Part of me was genuinely happy for Camille because I knew she'd always wanted kids, but another part worried about what this meant for our slowly rebuilding relationship. I congratulated her and asked how she was feeling about it. She said, excited and terrified in equal measure. Then I made something clear to her. I told her I wouldn't be the family member who showed up for every event if Preston was going to be hostile toward me. I'd love my niece or nephew, but I had boundaries now. Camille said she understood completely. She was working on setting boundaries with Preston about her family relationships, trying to make him see that he couldn't control who she spent time with or how she maintained connections with me. I could hear the strain in her voice when she talked about it, the exhaustion that comes from constant conflict. I realized her marriage was probably a lot harder than she was letting on. We talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. Later that week, Elise came into my office with lunch from the Thai place down the street. We ate together like we did most Thursdays. She looked at me across the desk and said, I seemed lighter and happier than I'd been in years. I stopped mid-bite and thought about it. She was right. Setting boundaries and prioritizing my own dignity had lifted a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. I wasn't constantly worried about managing Camille's problems anymore. Wasn't walking on eggshells trying to keep everyone happy. Just living my own life and letting other people handle their own messes. That realization made me think about all the things I'd been putting off while dealing with everyone else's drama. I'd been talking about taking a real vacation for years, but never actually did it. Always some crisis or situation that needed my attention. Some problem I had to solve. Not anymore. I booked a week at an accessible resort in Hawaii. I left 2 weeks later. The resort was beautiful and actually designed for wheelchair users instead of just claiming to be accessible. Wide pathways, roll-in showers, beach access that actually worked. I spent the whole week reading paperback novels on the beach, swimming in the ocean with the help of the resort's adaptive equipment, eating good food, and not thinking about family drama or complicated relationships. Just existing in my own space, without anyone needing anything from me. It was the most relaxed I'd felt in over a decade. When I got back home, there was a card waiting in my mailbox. I recognized Camille's handwriting on the envelope. Inside was an old photo I hadn't seen in years, Camille as a skinny teenager and me in my wheelchair. We were both laughing at something off camera. I couldn't even remember what had been so funny that day, but the joy on our faces was real. The note inside was short, but it hit me hard. It said, "Thank you for always protecting me, and I'm sorry I didn't protect you back." I sat in my living room holding that card for a long time. It didn't fix everything, didn't erase the hurt or magically repair our relationship, but it was real acknowledgement, real remorse, not excuses or justifications, just honest recognition of what I'd given and what she'd failed to give back. I put the photo on my desk at work where I could see it, a reminder that people could grow and change if they actually tried. That boundaries didn't mean giving up on relationships. just reshaping them into something healthier. The next day, I picked up my phone and called Camille. She answered on the second ring and sounded surprised to hear from me. I told her the card meant a lot and that the photo brought back good memories. We talked for almost an hour about things we hadn't discussed in years. Remember when Dad tried to teach us both to fish and we spent the whole afternoon untangling the lines? Remember Mom's terrible meatloaf recipe that she insisted was delicious? We laughed about the time Camille accidentally dyed all her white shirts pink in the laundry. Small things that had nothing to do with the wedding or Preston or any of the hurt between us. Just two siblings remembering when things were simpler. Before I hung up, Camille said this felt like a new start, and I agreed it did. Not the old relationship where I fixed everything, but something different, something more equal. 3 weeks later, Camille texted me a photo. She'd had the baby that morning, a boy. They named him after our father. I stared at that tiny wrinkled face on my phone screen for a long time. My nephew, part of my family, even though his father would probably always resent me. I didn't call or visit the hospital, gave them space for those first overwhelming days. Instead, I contacted my financial advisor and set up a college fund. I put $50,000 in it as a starting amount. I sent Camille the account information with a note that made things very clear. This money was for my nephew's education, not for Camille and Preston to access, not for them to borrow against, for the baby only. Camille texted back a simple thank you. No arguments about the restrictions, no asking for more, just gratitude. 2 months passed before Camille asked if she could bring the baby to meet me. I suggested my office since it was neutral territory and I could control how long the visit lasted. They arrived on a Tuesday afternoon between client meetings. Camille looked exhausted in that new parent way. Dark circles under her eyes and spit up stains on her shoulder, but she was smiling when she carefully transferred the baby into my arms. My nephew was warm and solid and made these little grunting noises. I studied his face, looking for family resemblances. He had Camille's nose and what might become Mom's chin. I felt this rush of love for him mixed with sadness, that his father would probably always tell him I was the villain who ruined their wedding, that he'd grow up hearing Preston's version where I was petty and cruel instead of hurt and standing up for myself. I held him for 20 minutes while Camille told me about sleepless nights and learning to change diapers. When they left, I sat at my desk for a while, just processing how complicated family had become. Over the next few months, Camille and I fell into a routine. She brought the baby to visit every other week or so, always just her, never Preston. I was fine with that arrangement, and I suspected she was too. The visits gave her a break from the tension at home, and gave me time with my nephew without dealing with Preston's cold hostility. Camille would update me on the baby's milestones. Rolling over, first tooth coming in, starting to recognize faces. She looked tired every time I saw her, but there was real happiness there, too. Being a mother suited her, even though I could tell the marriage part was hard. She never complained directly about Preston, but I could read between the lines. The way she'd pause before answering questions about how things were going at home, the careful way she'd phrase things to avoid saying anything negative. I didn't push her to talk about it, just let her have these peaceful visits where she could focus on her son instead of her problems. The anniversary of our parents' death fell on a Sunday. Camille called that morning and asked if I wanted to visit their graves together. We hadn't been there at the same time since the funeral. I met her at the cemetery around noon. The weather was nice, and someone had left fresh flowers at the headstone recently. We stood there quiet for a while before Camille started talking. She said Mom and Dad would have been so disappointed in how the wedding went down, how she let Preston treat me that way, how she took my help for granted for so many years. I agreed they would have been upset about all of it, but I also said they'd be proud that we were trying to fix things now, instead of letting the relationship die completely, that we were both working on being better. Camille wiped her eyes and nodded. We stayed another hour talking about our parents and sharing memories. When we left, things felt lighter somehow, like we'd included them in our healing process. A few weeks after the cemetery visit, Camille told me something that surprised me. She said the marriage counseling was actually helping her understand herself better, that she'd always been someone who avoided conflict by letting other people make decisions. Easier to go along with what Preston wanted than to fight about it. But the counselor was helping her see that wasn't healthy, that she needed to be more assertive about her own needs and values, especially when it came to treating her family with respect. She was working on setting boundaries with Preston about her relationship with me, making it clear that he didn't get to control whether she spent time with her sibling or brought her son to visit me. I could hear in her voice how hard that work was, how much energy it took to push back against Preston's expectations. But she sounded determined in a way I hadn't heard from her before. I admitted to Camille that I'd been in therapy too. I started going a couple months after the wedding to work through my anger. Not just about the reject table, but about years of being treated as less than because of my wheelchair. My therapist helped me see patterns I hadn't recognized before. How I'd learned to make myself small and convenient to avoid being seen as difficult. How I'd convinced myself that demanding basic respect was selfish or demanding. But it wasn't. It was necessary. I needed to value myself enough to set boundaries when people treated me badly. Camille listened and said she was glad I was getting that help, that I deserved to advocate for myself without feeling guilty about it. Almost a year after the wedding disaster, Camille asked if I'd be willing to come to her son's first birthday party. I hesitated before answering and asked the obvious question. Was Preston okay with me being there? Camille said he'd accepted that I was part of her life, whether he liked it or not, that she'd made it clear this wasn't negotiable. If he wanted her at family events, then I got to be there too. It wasn't the warm welcome I might have hoped for, but it was something. I told her I'd come to the party. The party was at a local park on a Saturday afternoon. Warm weather and lots of families around. I spotted Camille setting up decorations when I arrived. Preston was arranging food on a picnic table, and his face went tight when he saw me wheel up. But he came over and said hello in this perfectly polite voice that had zero warmth behind it. Asked how I was doing, commented on the nice weather, all very correct and civil and completely fake. I matched his energy, polite but distant. We weren't going to be friends, and we both knew it. But we could coexist in the same space for a few hours. I spent most of the party playing with my nephew and talking to Camille's friends. Watched the baby smash his face into his birthday cake and get frosting everywhere. He laughed, this pure, delighted laugh that made everyone smile. For those few hours, I could focus on loving my nephew and forget about the complicated mess of adult relationships around him. After the cake was done and people started packing up, 3 of Camille's friends pulled me aside. They said they'd always thought the reject table thing was horrible, and they were glad I stood up for myself. One of them admitted she'd wanted to say something at the wedding, but didn't know how without making a scene. Another said Preston's reputation had taken a real hit when people found out what actually happened, that a lot of their mutual friends had been quietly judging him for it. I thanked them for saying something, but told them it wasn't about revenge or ruining Preston's reputation. It was about refusing to fund my own humiliation. They nodded and seemed to understand the difference. As I left the party, I felt like maybe things were moving in the right direction. Not perfect, not healed completely, but better than they'd been. Camille and I were building something new based on honesty and boundaries instead of one-sided sacrifice. It was slower and harder than the old way, but it felt more real. Over the next few months, Camille and I found a rhythm that worked. We met for lunch every other Tuesday at this sandwich place near my office. She brought photos of the baby on her phone and showed me milestones like rolling over and grabbing toys. I told her about landing a new client or problems with my office lease. Normal sibling stuff. When I offered to set up a college fund for my nephew, Camille actually looked me in the eye and said thank you instead of just accepting it like it was owed to her. That small shift meant everything. She started asking about my life instead of just talking about her problems. Remembered my birthday without a reminder. Checked in when I mentioned a difficult client situation. The relationship felt balanced for the first time since the accident. I thought about the canceled check sometimes, usually late at night when I couldn't sleep. Part of me still felt guilty about the chaos it caused and the vendors who got caught in the middle, but mostly I felt relieved. The wedding disaster forced everyone to see me as a real person with feelings and limits, not just a bank account that solved problems. Camille's friends treated me differently now, with actual respect instead of polite distance. Even my business contacts who heard the story seemed to view me as someone who stood up for themselves rather than someone to pity. I didn't regret making that choice, even knowing the pain it caused. Sometimes you have to burn something down to build it better. Preston and I crossed paths at family events, maybe 3 or 4 times a year. We were polite and cold, like distant acquaintances forced to share space. He asked how my business was doing. I asked about his event planning work. We never talked about the wedding or the money or the reject table. Camille managed both relationships by keeping them completely separate, which worked fine for me. She brought my nephew to visit me alone. I sent birthday gifts and called to check in. Her son would grow up knowing there was someone in the family who used a wheelchair and didn't take disrespect from anyone, which felt important. Camille told me once that she explained to Preston that I was part of her life, whether he liked it or not. And that conversation apparently involved some serious fighting. But she held firm on it, which showed growth. 2 years after the wedding, my business had grown by 40%. I hired 2 new associates and moved into a bigger office with better accessibility features. I took vacations without feeling guilty, set boundaries with clients who demanded too much, built a life where my wheelchair was just part of who I was, not something to apologize for or hide. Camille texted one Saturday morning asking if I wanted to grab coffee, and I met her at our usual place. We talked about her son starting to walk, and my plans to expand into sports medicine accounting. Then Camille put down her coffee cup and said she was proud of me for standing up for myself, even when it was hard. I looked at her and could tell she actually meant it this time. Not the empty words from before the wedding, but real understanding of what it cost me to demand respect. I told her I was proud of her too, for learning to set boundaries and be a better sister. We sat there for a while drinking our coffee and watching people walk by.